Hey, how's it going, guys? ZDEyE here. So I wanted to share my thoughts on this announcement for the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, if you do not know me, and I actually have played Final Fantasy VII Remake, so basically, as we understand it, the first part of this game, and we already know and it's been clarified that Final Fantasy VII Remake will be in 3 parts. So of course this means that by the time this game comes out, the Rebirth, right, the second part of the remake of Final Fantasy VII, means presumably perhaps you should take another 3 additional years for the last part for the Final Fantasy VII to come out. So this basically means sometime during in 2026, that's when we should see this kind of a wrap up. Now, we can see that, from the trailer initially, that it is taking a little bit of a different approach what we're kind of used to from the Final Fantasy VII originally. Now, because you can see the title of this video, you can clearly see that I have not played the original Final Fantasy VII, but I do know initial story of how it kind of goes about. Why? Well, it's because I played Final Fantasy VII Remake, and because I liked it so much, I kind of wanted to see what was the story about it, in the original. How much of a difference will there be with the comparisons, the lore, like I said, right? I think it's actually quite interesting. So as such, this actually sparked an interesting thought in my mind, kind of curious, where shall this go? Because I know there's some dev moments that should have been happening or perhaps shall happen, we don't know. It's been kind of already teased in the trailer if you haven't been paying attention, so I don't think it's much of a, spoilers. But it's interesting because after finding out, how everything has wrapped up in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and basically how everything can go with a different sort of a type of a journey, I'm actually kind of glad. I'm glad the way that the remake is actually taking a little bit of a different approach, even though it is sticking somewhat true to its story. To an extent again, right? Of course, major characters seem to be alive, major characters seem to be dead, and as such, it's kind of interesting approach to where shall this go, right? I'm curious to see where it is going to be taking a journey for Cloud and his companions as well. So as such, my reaction towards this Final Fantasy Rebirth, I'm very much looking forward to it. I've platinumed Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm definitely considering platinuming the Rebirth as well. If the trophies are going to be similar, then yeah, definitely I will be. But yeah, it looks good, by the way, the sort of a gameplay presentation that they showed here. It's unfortunate the way we have to wait longer than a year for its release, and to be honest with you, I kind of doubt that it will even come out in 2023. I feel like it's gonna get pushed to 2024. It's still incredible though, there's so many Final Fantasy games coming out in 1 year. It's like Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy Rebirth, coming out in 2023. It's going to be a very big deal for Final Fantasy, fanatics and fans. And as such, it's interesting because I'm just thinking, and I'm like I said, right, I feel like there's definitely going to be a delay for this Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm still curious to see if it will hit that 2023 mark in the winter. Still, even though they say winter, it's still a possibility that because how they phrase it as a winter, it could still turn and go over to, I believe, till the February of 2024. So it doesn't necessarily mean it will be coming out in 2023. It is still a possibility it may actually, in fact, come out 2024, without actually getting a delay. Well, of course, we'll have to wait and see for that. I want to touch on one other thing. Rebirth. The title. Why that? I think I kind of get it. If you have been paying attention to the original of the Final Fantasy VII, then perhaps it kind of makes sense. Maybe not. But still, I'm just thinking as well. Final Fantasy, right? So Final Fantasy, so it's FF, and then we're saying 7, right? And it's FF7, then remake as an R. So with this case, because they got rid of the remake part, they instead put in Rebirth. It's going to be the same initial names like with the having, you know, with the letters. But this, it's interesting, why did they not just like bother, you know, having in parts, like Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 or something like that? Maybe it would have been like kind of scary, if that makes sense. You know, imagine like you'll have to come and buy a game that was supposed to be coming out for Part 1. So if you did not play Part 1, you'll have to buy that game first because you feel like it's important to do that. But perhaps that in this case, Square Enix decided to actually make sure that you don't have that kind of obligation for you to go back and buy that version of the game. But I do feel like there will be a ginormous bundle with this game. As soon as like the third part comes out, they're gonna have like an extra special bundle to include and perhaps even upgrade the you know, the quality of the game like the best possible as it can be, all the way from like the first part of the Final Fantasy remake to Rebirth and whatever the third part will be called. And we have to consider one other thing. If, and presumably if, Final Fantasy VII Remake, the Part 3, the last part, will come out in 2026, maybe even 2027, by that time, believe it or not, we may in fact already have a PlayStation 6. God, just thinking about it's kind of scary, very scary thought. Because it usually takes about 7 years for the next generation cycle to come in. So, you know, because PlayStation 5 came out in 2020, so 2027 it is the next release. Presumably, of course, anything can change. The next release will be, well, PlayStation 6. Because we already know that Final Fantasy Rebirth is exclusive for the PlayStation 5. It doesn't seem like it's even going to be coming out on PlayStation 4. So it's going to be interesting. I'm very much looking forward to it. And, you know, I feel like, you know, this is, you know, it's Square Enix, it's Final Fantasy, it's beloved title, an IP that a lot of people praise and definitely would love to play it more and more. And I'm sure it's going to get some sort of a remaster and it's going to combine all 3 games in one for the PlayStation 6. And it's just going to blow everything away. It's like going to be one of the biggest games ever. And of course, they're going to have tweaks and stuff like that, upgrades, fidelity, and all that good stuff. Man, maybe I'm looking forward to the future too far, perhaps, but it's still, it's interesting thought. It's just an interesting thought, kind of, you know, sprawl out in my mind. Either way, guys, I'm definitely looking forward to this Final Fantasy Rebirth. I'm curious to see how the story will progress and how much of a difference will there be from the original. Because, man, like the way they have been going about with the part 2 of the remake, I'm genuinely am quite glad that they're actually making a 3-parter instead of like going way too overboard with a 5-part or 6-part if they wanted to. Again, I'm not too sure if they could have. Maybe they would have had to extend a lot of things, and you know, just like for no damn reason, because like, you know, nobody really wants a filler between these games. But again, you know, if the filler is done right and it is entertaining and has a very addicting gameplay loop, then I don't think we can argue much about that, right? Either way, guys, do let me know what you think about this announcement. I am very much excited, like I said 50 times in a row. And, you know, what did you think about it, right? Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Right, like and subscribe. See you guys all. Have a wonderful day.